Grand Theft Auto 3 is an open-world adventure game developed by DMA Design, now known as Rockstar North. For those uninitiated, the massively successful Grand Theft Auto franchise began as a series of top-down cops and robbers-inspired adventures filled with violence and chaos as players climb through the criminal ranks of a fictional urban center. The team at DMA Design had always wanted Grand Theft Auto to evolve into a 3D series, and finally felt that it had become a possibility following the release of the PlayStation 2. The original prototype of this third major Grand Theft Auto entry was created on the Sega Dreamcast following the release of GTA 2 in 1999. In reference to its development, Rockstar co-founder and producer Sam Houser described Grand Theft Auto 3 as a cross between a gangster movie and an RPG, citing influences from the Legend of Zelda video game series and the 1990 film Goodfellas. Rockstar originally pitched their new open-world game to Microsoft as an exclusive for the upcoming Xbox console, though they turned it down due to the adult nature of the title and the poor sales of earlier entries in the series. In the end, the game was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2001, Windows computers in 2002, and finally, Microsoft's Xbox in 2003. While the earlier games were by no means themed around sunshine and friendship, the added detail and immersion of a 3D world made this franchise's debaucherous mayhem much more explicit, and thanks to this, the game sparked heavy debate over the appropriateness of its subject matter, fanning the flames of the ever-popular claim of video games causing real-world violence. In fact, the content within Grand Theft Auto 3 was considered so controversial at launch that it caused Walmart to start checking the ages of customers when purchasing mature-rated games. However, Grand Theft Auto may be one of the biggest examples in the video game industry of no publicity being bad publicity, as the game went on to become the best-selling video game of 2001, in total selling over 14.5 million copies by the end of the PS2's lifespan. Even in 2002, the only game to outsell it was its own sequel, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. It also received the Diamond Sales Award in the United Kingdom for being the first video game to reach over 1 million sales in that region. Retrospectively, Grand Theft Auto 3 is commonly viewed as one of the greatest video games of all time, especially in regards to its impact on open-world design and player freedom. It also set an incredibly high bar for both quality and popularity within the first year of the PS2's lifespan. Review aggregate site Metacritic has the game resting at an impressive 97, tying only with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 as the highest-rated PS2 game of all time. There sure is a lot to consider when defining this game's quality, so let's see how many of this world's excellent features we can come up with as we consider what's so great about Grand Theft Auto 3. This entry in the series takes place in a reinvented version of the same setting as the first Grand Theft Auto, that being Liberty City, a lively and chaotic world loosely based on New York City. During design stages, Liberty City was considered to be a hybrid between a post-industrial Midwest town and a generic East Coast city. Staff at Rockstar's New York offices would provide guidance for the game's cultural inspiration, even making sure the in-game car manufacturers were appropriate to the urban setting. Other major American cities to be used for inspiration include Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Liberty City, much like its real-world inspiration, is divided into characteristically unique boroughs, with the player starting in Portland and later reaching Staunton Island and Shoreside Vale, with these boroughs being parodies of Brooklyn, Manhattan, and New Jersey, respectively. Our protagonist in this adventure is silent and unnamed, though eventually was given the name of Claude in the later entry of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Claude never speaks in order to better allow players to view him as whatever kind of character they prefer. The developers of GTA 3 also liked his silence in juxtaposition to the other colorful and eccentric characters that fill the world around him. Players find themselves taking control of Claude after he's betrayed by his girlfriend following a bank heist. Luckily, he finds an opportunity to escape during transportation, and a fellow escapee, 8-Ball, introduces Claude to a few connections in Liberty City to get him back in the game. After escaping and getting a little practice navigating the streets, we find ourselves at our first hideout, Eddie's Garage, where players can store one vehicle of their choosing and save between play sessions. There can also be unlockable bonuses present at your hideout, but we'll get to that later. The game originally came packaged with a manual that included a pretty extensive map of points of interest around Liberty City, and while the game does have an on-screen radar and smooth learning curve, I would still suggest looking up this map if you plan on playing GTA 3, at least until you've learned your way around. Once you wrap your head around the city's layout, it's actually really easy to find your way around despite the map's size. There are enough unique landmarks on every corner to not only make every street you drive down an interesting visual experience, but also act as guideposts to remind the players where they are and what else is in that area. This geographical learning curve is compounded by the city being unraveled roughly 1/3 at a time through individual boroughs, so that the player doesn't have to memorize the whole map all at once before they even know where their own garage is. To progress through the game, players will essentially serve as a hired gun for any of the crime families that rule this game's metropolis setting. There are 7 different gangs that fight over ownership of Liberty City, each with their own unique visual styles, favorite cars, and other distinctive features to help you pick them out by sight and circumstances. Completing missions will reward the player with money and change their reputation, for better or worse, among the various overlords of Liberty City's underbelly. The developers considered each individual mission in the game to be its own short story, which contributed to the complete overarching image. The first few missions teach players everything they'll need to survive in Liberty City, such as how to pick up passengers, acquire transportation, and settle disputes with business competitors. As more connections open up to the player, they'll be able to choose between multiple missions at any point in time, with each of these potential quest givers depicted on the heads-up radar. The short mission style is incredibly addictive because no matter if you succeed or fail that time around, it's easy to decide if you want to have another go at it or go do literally anything else in the city. For example, the player can earn extra money by hijacking a taxi and picking up their own fares. This also gives them an opportunity to learn their way around the city for easier navigation later on. The taxi missions play a bit like the Sega arcade game Crazy Taxi, with the player receiving more money depending on how quickly they get their fare to the intended destination. Much like the taxi, police cruisers offer another bonus mode to earn money. If the player manages to acquire a cop car, then they can activate Vigilante mode, which rewards them for every criminal they can get off the streets of Liberty City. If they're not feeling particularly violent during a play session, then players are also able to use other emergency vehicles to put out fires or transport injured citizens to the hospital. These specialty vehicles are also equipped with sirens instead of traditional horns, which can be used to encourage other drivers out of the player's lane, as well as keep them from crossing intersections so you can get around faster. Each of these vehicle-based side missions also has the potential to reward more dedicated players with bonus pickups at their hideouts, such as more health, adrenaline, and police bribes. Whenever the player is witnessed committing a crime, the response by law enforcement becomes more and more fearsome with each star added to the player's wanted level. At 3 stars, for instance, a police helicopter will make it harder for you to lose your pursuers, and at 5 stars, federal agents will be called in to take you down by virtually any means necessary. If the player can make it to any body shop in the city before being caught in a police chase, they'll be able to repair and repaint their car, causing them to lose their wanted level and claim a newly commandeered vehicle as their own. If a player runs out of health, they'll be considered wasted and taken to a hospital, where they'll be revived for a portion of their money and relieved of all of their weapons. Similarly, cops will bust the player and take them into the nearest police station, stripping them of their weapons before kicking them back onto the streets. Every so often, as long as the player has been spending an appropriate amount of time with each mission giver in the story, the game will bottleneck into a single mandatory mission in order to trigger some new event in the story that often changes an aspect of the game going forward. This could be introducing a new major character, allowing the player to access a new section of the city, or charging players an upfront cash fee to make sure they've played enough other missions to understand the game moving forward. This is a smooth means of separating the game into what could be thought of as chapters in order to naturally progress the overall narrative without restricting the player's freedom when the time for that checkpoint comes along. There are a lot of characters that I wish we got to spend more time with, because they seem interesting for one reason or another, but the fact that certain chapters and large clusters of missions all take place in association with different gangs fits well with our hired gun protagonist and does keep the story's pace moving forward at a surprisingly steady rate for such an open world experience. This is largely due to the fact that there's always a reason to explore a new part of the city. The missions are also incredibly well laid out in order to introduce the player to hidden nooks and crannies within the city that they very well could have driven right by without a second thought. For the players that really want a reason to explore every corner of the city, there are 100 hidden packages scattered around all 3 boroughs. There is, however, incentive for every player to collect these parcels, because for every 10 of these hidden packages that are found, a more powerful weapon will be delivered for unlimited use outside the player's hideout. By default, there's a baseball bat outside the player's living quarters, but later on, the player will have free access to a pistol at 10 packages, an Uzi at 20, and so on, saving the player plenty of money on new weapons every time they're busted or wasted. The control scheme in Grand Theft Auto 3 is straightforward enough to become second nature after just a few hours of gameplay. That in itself is a substantial feat for this era of 3D gaming, especially due to the fact that the PS2 was the first console to come default with controllers that had 2 analog sticks. GTA 3 also came out a month before the GameCube and Xbox had even released, so other notable forerunners in the 3D movement department, such as Halo Combat Evolved, hadn't reached consumers yet. This game's comfortable control scheme is doubly impressive due to the fact that it works for operating your character on foot and in a vehicle. And on top of that, not just a vehicle, as in a scripted action sequence, but virtually any vehicle you wanted in the game, from sedans to boats to airplanes. Every vehicle in the game feels different to drive, with their own weights, speeds, and handling capabilities. It's no Gran Turismo for any car buffs out there, but they're easily controlled and plentiful in variety. The nicer or more useful cars are often more difficult to get your hands on, either because they can only be found in certain areas or are more likely to trigger a response from the police or an upset gang member. There are also plenty of reasons for the player to use different vehicles. While a taxi or pickup truck may be fine for getting you from point to point in Liberty City, it wouldn't be fast enough for a drag race or heavy duty enough to withstand a barrage of bullets as you rob a bank. Other times, an explicit vehicle is provided for the player in order to blend in with the enemies or carry VIPs to a certain location. Of course, it's always fun to use the fastest car you can find, or whichever one generally suits your preferences. However, testing multitudes of random and wildly different vehicles that don't always control the way you expect provides a fun challenge, which was certainly planned by the developers to keep getaways, chases, and escorts from feeling like old news after the first few hours of gameplay. The sound design may be the most critical factor in making this game's world truly feel lively and authentic. This goes for the random profanities that people shout as you nearly hit them with your car, as well as the annoyingly repetitive yet equally catchy nature of FM radio, and even the little details like the echoes of your character's feet in a parking garage. The flawlessness of GTA 3's sound design is what keeps this world of building blocks from ever falling apart, because it's so believable in its attention to detail. The game features roughly 3.5 hours of in-game radio material, including a wide array of real licensed songs to cover the vast tastes of American radio. There are also 2 dialogue-based stations, one talk show, and one which is comedy sketches in the form of advertisements. Sometimes major characters within the game will call the talk show radio station for a little extra backstory and comedic character development. Similarly, at occasional points in the story, no matter which radio station you're on, a news report will come through to announce more important physical changes to the game's world, such as the repair of a bridge between 2 separate boroughs. For smaller developments, the player will receive updates via pager about changes in the world, such as an invite by an anonymous new contact for more work, or the delivery of an award for completing bonus missions. Time in GTA 3 naturally flows between day and night, with certain missions only taking place at a certain time of day, and time jumping forward by several hours whenever the player is arrested or taken to the hospital. Combining this with the randomly changing weather between clear skies and thunderstorms keeps the city constantly looking different. The difference between an overcast foggy day or a clear sky sunset is as important to Liberty City's liveliness as the citizens sauntering down the sidewalks. In fact, GTA 3 is one of the earliest notable uses, alongside the Silent Hill franchise, of fog in a video game intentionally implemented not just to restrict how much the game had to render, but for aesthetic appeal. Grand Theft Auto's engine seemed to have no problem rendering distant objects like buildings and trees, at least to some believable extent, so the contrast of clear days to overcast and foggy ones actually creates an enjoyably stark contrast in the way the world looks, just as can be felt from the difference between night and day. This is one of the earliest popular games that I can think of that not only had a believable progression of time, but an equally realistic weather cycle, which furthered the authenticity of Liberty City that much more. The weather and lighting mingle especially well on those aforementioned foggy days, because you can even see the way the lights from cars or street signs illuminate the fog. From virtually anywhere in the city, you can also occasionally see planes in the sky as they actually fly in and out of the airport in Shoreside Vale, which in my opinion is a phenomenally tiny touch of detail that could have easily been overlooked and widely seen as unnecessary in the first place, but further generates the realistic atmosphere of the large urban centers that Liberty City attempts to emulate. Grand Theft Auto 3 was one of the earliest PS2 releases to feel like gaming had truly reached the next generation. Nothing of this scope was even remotely possible on the original PlayStation, Nintendo 64, or even Sega's newer Dreamcast console. Art director Aaron Garbett wanted the world within Grand Theft Auto 3 to be a place you lived in, rather than just a thing you played, as compared to other video games of the time. Even though it's not exactly a perfect depiction of New York, or any other real location for that matter, Liberty City is still most likely the most elaborate and detailed depiction of a realistic city at this point in video games. Another tremendously impressive feature of this game's revolutionary open world was the fact that there was incentive for the player to visit and inspect virtually every corner of this city. You never know down which alley or in which random obscured parking lot corner you would find a whole new side mission, way of losing the cops, or other worthwhile collectibles. In its historical context, GTA 3 far outshined the then reigning king of open world adventures, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which didn't have nearly as many reasons to look through every hole in the ground unless you desperately needed to stock up on bugs. The way the player experiences the world in Grand Theft Auto 3 is pretty much incomparable to what any other adventure or role-playing game was doing at this time. In many of those other large world games, each environment was generally experienced in a linear fashion, wildly varying in visual design to keep each locale interesting as the player saw them, became familiar with the area, and then moved on. Many of these areas may have had reason to revisit for collectibles or some purpose in the story, but at that point, each section of the world feels like old news, because you've already experienced it as much as was appropriate for the narrative. However, in GTA, the world may not be as fantastical, but it actually becomes more fun to spend time in and explore as the player becomes more familiar with the city. The more time the player spends in Grand Theft Auto 3, the more likely they are to find something they really enjoy doing. This could be anything from drag races and exploratory walks to vigilante missions and nonsensical sprees of destruction. As the player becomes more comfortable with navigating this extraordinarily lively world, every one of those gameplay possibilities becomes more enticing, because they all make sense in the context of the world and supply the player with a consistently engaging and varied, but even more importantly, consistently fun experience. That is what's so great about Grand Theft Auto 3. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming, as we explored the lively world of Grand Theft Auto 3. If you want to support the channel, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and do whatever else the algorithm demands of us to keep up with our favorite content. Also, consider being a part of the community on Discord, Twitch, or Patreon. If you want to hear what's great about another game, check out the link to our last episode, Eco, on screen or in the description. And let us know your thoughts on GTA and what games you'd like to see in the future. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.